is, maybe the sprinters and everybody else in the world having to send out these messages would actually be a very powerful statement.
No, I think artists I love artists, and they reflect. They hold a mirror up and talk to society often, and it's quite clever. And when they said, in the name of commonality, multiplicity and solidarity, and then a dash, in art as in society. Now, I arrived back in New Zealand, Pam and I arrived back in New Zealand on Saturday, and the last place we left was the UK, and the place is a mess, an absolute mess. And I think if artists can hold up a mirror and say, listen, people, we're all in this together, and the splits in the society there are just disgraceful. And there are sometimes some conversations where I stepped in, as I always do, and because I believe they should stay in Europe, and I feel very strongly about that. But one of the guys I had dinner with, he just cut me dead, and he just was, you're offending me. We've had a vote on it, and we've made a decision. I was trying to debate with them how they got the decision across the line. Not interested. And they're all over the place. So their elections are messy as hell.
You're right.
So the artists are doing a good job.
The artists are doing it, but we can live with that, with the artists doing their thing.
Yes, I don't think runners would run across the line.
Never happen in sport.
No.
Okay, talking about sport, we thought we'd bring up another controversy in sport just before we finish, because, we like a good celebrity story. Footballer David Beckham has ignored criticism of a public display of affection, PDA, with his daughter Harper, sharing another photo of them kissing on the lips on social media. He's done it before and received lots of complaints of people who think it's inappropriate. He says no, he kisses all his kids on the lips, and because he loves them. But people have been debating this on social media. The likes of Piers Morgan, the TV host in the UK, has called it creepy. What do you guys think? We've only got a couple of minutes, but weird or creepy? Or
Piers Morgan's creepy.
Yes.
I wasn't going to say that, but yeah.
Oh, for God's sake. Look, this is a lovely family, and if you do follow them on any social media, they are a lovely family who clearly have a lot of affection for one another. If he wants to kiss his kids on the lips, good on him.
Correct.
And people should just pull their heads in and find something better to talk about.
One of my great moments in my relationship with my dad was that my dad always kissed me on the lips, good night, till I was a late teenager. And we, and it was...
Yeah. Good
and
on you.
I remember that as a really special thing between us.
Yeah.
Because, he was a man of his generation. He wasn't a man who showed a lot of emotion. But that was the thing. Every night, I was there. And that's really special. Why do you think people find this stuff creepy?
I don't know, but I always... an old friend of mine taught me this, and every single conversation I finish with any of my kids, I say I love you.
Yeah.
So that the
really important.
last thing, like if I get run over on the way home, they'll all be able to say the last thing the old man said to us is he loved us. And I think good on you, Beckham, and you keep it up. And social media I find revolting.
Kiss it like Beckham.
Yes.
All right,
Exactly.
That's the message for today. We're coming to the end. Jenny and Gary, thank you so much for your time today. Jenny, can
Thank you.
that Reserve Bank guide again, very quickly, what's it called?
It's called the Capital Review Go-To Guide 2019.
We've had
It's got pictures and good explanations.
Great, we've had questions about that, so thank you very much. That's the panel for today. Checkpoint, Lisa Owen is next after the 5 o'clock news. Take care.
Te whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. E haere nei, thousands of households in Samoa raise a red flag in the fight against the deadly measles outbreak. Vaccination teams go door to door during a 2-day immunisation blitz as the tiny nation shuts down to virtually all but hearses and medics. Back here, our government plans to drive through law changes to lower the price of petrol. We talk to the Consumer Affairs Minister live. The chief censor exposes New Zealanders' porn habits. Banks are being forced to have, more cash in the bank. What's that going to cost you? And there's something rotten about the volume of food scraps Aucklanders are sending to the dump. Don't forget, you can watch us live on Facebook.
RNZ News at 5. Kia ora, ko Susana Leatawa tēnei. Almost 200 Queenstown school children are being evacuated from a remote campsite after the heavy rain that's deluged inland Otago this week. The Year 10 pupils of Wakatipu High School have been on the annual trip to Branches Camp, about 15 kilometres from Skippers Canyon, since last Friday. But the 12-day camp had to be cut short after ongoing rain swelled rivers and lakes in the Queenstown Lakes district. Met Service is predicting a further 200 millimetres of rain near the Otago headwaters by Saturday morning, and Lake Wanaka is nearly 2.5 metres above normal. About 40 children were evacuated by helicopter, with the rest to be taken out by four-wheel drive this afternoon. A school spokesperson says all the children are safe. The main road between Fox Glacier and Haast is closed due to a slip and is expected to remain closed overnight. A heavy rain warning is in place for Westland, Buller and Fiordland from Dartford Sound north. An experienced hiker who was swept almost to his death in a Tasman river says he's never seen water rise as fast as it did on Tuesday. Chris Muse, an outdoor guide in Alaska, was swept about 70 metres downstream after attempting to cross a tributary of the Motueka River. Mr Muse had been in bad weather for several days and was running low on food, so decided to cross the stream.
You know, I've been hiking all over the world, and I've never been in an area that is so immediately responsive to rain the way the rivers are here. So the levels just rose dramatically at a rate that I've never seen before.
Chris Muse says instinct kicked in as he was carried swiftly downstream in what he describes as the closest call he's had outdoors. The 30-year-old plans to continue his hike of the South Island section of the Te Araroa Trail towards Bluff. Auckland University has pulled PHARMAC-funded research about the nocebo effect after epilepsy patients expressed anger at being told symptoms are all in their heads. The patients are caught up in a controversial brand switch after PHARMAC pulled funding for the Lamictal and Arrow brands of the drug, Lamotrigine, in October in favour of funding one generic medication, Logum. 4 deaths and 50 other adverse reactions have been reported to the Centre for Adverse Reactions Monitoring over suspicions they are linked to the brand switch. As part of the nocebo research, some of the brand switch patients were sent a video which suggested side effects were brought on by a mistaken belief that the new medicine is inferior. PHARMAC backed down on the switch last month. The Prime Minister of Samoa, Tuila Sailele Malielegaoi, says 10,000 measles vaccines have gone out across the country, but data crunchers say only 5,000 or 6,000 needles have been used. The country has been in lockdown today with cars off the roads and businesses closed. Alex Perrottet reports.
Over 100 vans have sped around the country's roads, which have otherwise been deserted. Red flags of all types have been draped and tied outside homes. One nurse that spoke to RNZ says she gave out 60 immunisations over a 2.5-hour period. But based on information that's still coming in, the Prime Minister's goal of achieving 90% coverage by the end of tomorrow is still ambitious and unlikely. In Apia, Alex Perrottet.
The Automobile Association says a proposal to force fuel companies to display the price of their premium-grade fuel on the forecourt should mean motorists paying less in the long run. The proposal is one of a raft of recommendations made by the Commerce Commission to improve competition in the fuel sector, after it found consumers are probably paying more than they should at the pump. AA spokesperson Mark Stockdale says it can be difficult for motorists to work out what they can expect to pay for premium fuel, and the association has long called for prices to be displayed in a transparent way.
That will increase competition for those motorists that buy premium petrol. At the moment, they're paying too much, and this should result in premium petrol prices coming down.
Mark Stockdale from the Automobile Association. The Reserve Bank has confirmed that banks will have to hold significantly more capital to reduce their risk. The central bank has gone ahead with a proposal in a bid to make the financial system and the economy safer. Here's our business reporter, Madison Reedy.
The country's big banks are being forced to nearly double the amount of capital they have backing their lending, which will likely raise interest rates. The Reserve Bank has confirmed that the big four Australian-owned banks will have to raise the capital they hold from 10.5% of their loans to 18%. The decisions are largely in line with the Reserve Bank's original proposal, aimed at making the banks financially stronger to withstand a major crisis. The banks have warned of higher borrowing costs, lower deposit rates and credit rationing. The RBNZ estimates its proposals would add about 0.1% to lending costs. It has made some concessions, allowing a different mix of securities to be counted as capital, lowering the amount of capital increase needed by small banks and extending the time to bring in the changes by 2 years to 7. This is Madison Reedy.
A fire safety kit was stolen from a fire truck while firefighters attended a job in Palmerston North this afternoon. The Palmerston North Fire Brigade were called to warehouse stationery on Rangitike Street at midday, where a sprinkler alarm had gone off. During the job, people in a silver Mazda Familia stole the safety kit from the side locker of the fire truck. Area Commander Mitchell Brown says a staff member noticed the car and pointed it out as it left the car park. The police are investigating. It's 6 minutes past 5. Pole vaulter Eliza McCartney hopes she's finally discovered the reason behind a wretched run of injuries. The Rio Olympic bronze medalist has revealed she's possibly suffering from a genetic autoimmune disorder which particularly affects her tendons. In a social media post, McCartney says she has begun medication she hopes will solve the problem and allow her to compete at the Tokyo Olympics next year. McCartney has been in and out of moon boot over the past year and hasn't been able to walk after straining her Achilles tendon. But tests have now hopefully revealed what the underlying problem is and she is back to training. The new Chiefs coach Warren Gatland says he fully understands the weight of expectation on him as he returns to rugby in New Zealand for the first time in more than a decade. Gatland arrived back in the country on Tuesday, having been coach of Wales for the past 10 years. He'll be at the helm of the Chiefs for the 2020 season, but will then miss the 2021 competition as he will return to the UK to coach the British and Irish Lions on their tour of South Africa. Gatland recalls coming home in 2005 to coach Waikato, having already spent several years in England and Ireland, and how it went down with some rugby followers.
And I can remember some of the comments, people saying, oh, yeah, you might have been successful in the Northern Hemisphere, now that you're up against New Zealand coaches, you know, you're not as good as you thought you were. Some sort of things on the side. So, look, I'm really conscious of that and conscious of the expectations, and that's professional sport.
Warren Gatland. That's the news.
Samoa battles an epidemic.
Usually this time of the year it's Christmas, it's celebrations, but we're going into a very somber atmosphere. There is no big parties in Samoa.
Upholding patients' rights.
The question is around consent. Has a simple conversation been had with the patient to say what's going to happen?
And the charities regulator defends itself.
What do we achieve as a society if when people make mistakes or organisations make mistakes, we beat them up?
Check in with Morning Report weekdays from 6 on air and online.
Then on 9 to noon, helping to track and expose online political ads in the forthcoming UK election. And after 10, award-winning wildlife photographer Lindsay McRae on his penguin year and missing the birth of his first child for the Emperors. Join me, Lynn Freeman, and for Catherine Ryan on 9 to noon after Morning Report on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. Northland to Waikato, including Coromandel, Bay of Plenty and Taupo. Mainly fine, cloud early morning and night, and isolated showers during the afternoon. Waitomo to Whanganui, including Taranaki, Taumaranui and Taihape. A few showers tonight, mainly fine tomorrow. Manawatu, also Gisborne and Wairarapa, fine weather. Horowhenua to Wellington, cloudy periods tomorrow with a few showers. Westland, Fiordland, Canterbury High Country and Otago Lakes. Periods of rain with heavy falls and possible thunderstorms. Nelson, Marlborough and the remainder of Canterbury, mainly fine. High cloud increasing tomorrow with a few spots of rain. For central Otago, Dunedin and Clutha, cloudy periods and isolated showers becoming more widespread for a time tomorrow when some could be heavy. Southland showers, some heavy with possible thunderstorms from midday tomorrow. Chatham Islands, mainly fine. RNZ National, it's 5:09.
Thanks, Susanna. And this is Checkpoint. I'm Lisa Owen. Samoa went into shutdown today as the death toll from the measles epidemic climbed to 62 and a 2-day door-to-door vaccination campaign got underway. People were told to stay at home today between the hours of 7 a.m. and 5 p.m. And the roads were closed to non-essential services as medical teams travelled around the country vaccinating the young and old in their homes. The unimmunised were told to leave something red outside their homes so that medical teams would know if they needed a measles jab. And as Logan Church and Alex Perrottet report, the Prime Minister was quick to tell media today the government acted as fast as it could after a visitor from New Zealand brought the disease to his country.
We're standing in the middle of Apia in the middle of the day. It would usually be bustling with cars, shoppers and workers, but today it's a ghost town. The government's ordered that all road travel will be banned unless authorised by the government. The only exemptions: official vehicles, vaccination vans, police cars and media. People are to stay in their homes as more than 100 vaccination teams travel the country. They're told to hang a red cloth or flag outside their house to signal that someone needs to be immunised. Driving out of the city, we enter the village of Whaleata. Despite a vaccination drive going on for weeks, there are red flags everywhere. One of them belongs to Vai Esera.
I've been waking up around 6 o'clock in the morning and put my red flag there on that tree so that we can show people that come and vaccine us. I think it's only me, my wife and the other older son, but the rest of them, they're already.
Driving around, most people seem to be abiding by the laws. But the police are setting up checkpoints to check if drivers have been given clearance to be on the roads or not. Those found to be flouting the rules were given warnings and had their licence plate numbers recorded. Beside one such checkpoint is Nana Iolo's home. He's tied a red t-shirt to a pole to make a makeshift flag.
I've only been out here since 6:45 this morning. I've seen a lot of vans go past, but I'm sure they'll come round.
Day on day, this disaster gets worse. Today, the death toll stands at 62. 2 more children have died overnight.
It's really tragic. You know, it's a very sad occasion for everybody. You know, epidemic. This is probably my first experience of a national catastrophe or disaster or whatever you want to call it. I know they had a tsunami about 10 years ago, but that's nothing compared to this. You know, it's... having kids myself, it's very sad to see these kids being taken away from us so young.
All of the data from the vaccination teams is being funneled back to here. A large tent set up outside the government buildings in Apia. Large screens keep track of progress. When we turned up at midday, the number of vaccines given out stood already at 2,000, but it was rising by the hundreds. The Prime Minister, Tuilaepa Sailili Malialingaoi, praised the vaccination effort and said his government was doing all it can. But some have criticised it for not acting sooner. The Samoan government suspended all MMR vaccinations after 2 children died on Savaihi last year after getting botched jabs. It took 8 months for the immunisation program to get back up and running. But the Prime Minister denies claims his government did not act fast enough when this outbreak began.
The measles that we have got came from a visitor from New Zealand. And so we did not leave it too late. What we have decided to do is to inject all the children first.
And he said it was disappointing some people had not heeded the government's message to get the young ones vaccinated as soon as possible.
Close to the centre at Matotua Hospital, there is a short road. I think the road is about 300 yards. And I saw numerous red flags are being raised there in the front of their homes, indicating that they only have a couple of steps from the hospital. And they didn't bother going to get the vaccination for the young. And this has been the challenge.
He said one of the big challenges was convincing people that traditional healing techniques aren't going to prevent or cure measles, especially as the practice has helped almost everything else in the past. The government had put out stern warnings to healers who were proposing alternative treatments to measles. One of those was Fritz Aliasa, who got in repeated trouble for reopening after being repeatedly told to shut down. He was charging locals for debunked Kangen water, sold to them as an alternative measles treatment. Today, a van full of police officers drove down his driveway to see if anything was happening. It was quiet. But the Prime Minister says some people are still opting to visit traditional healers rather than a hospital.
So some of our people still pay a visit to traditional healers, thinking that measles is a typical tropical disease, which is not. And on top of that, we also have those who have their own sideline, and they saw the opportunity to make a buck.
Meanwhile, back out on the roads, everything is quiet. It will stay this way tomorrow, the second and final day of the shutdown. And with the death toll rising every day, there is no way of knowing when this epidemic will be over. But plenty of people here are praying it's very soon. In Apia, Logan Church.
And Logan joins us now live from Apia. Logan, can you bring us up to date? How many people were vaccinated today?
Hi Lisa, well I'm standing right outside the data crunching nerve centre of this 2-day vaccination operation. Just a few minutes ago we heard that the number of people who had got the jab today was just under 5,000. Now just to give you an idea of the resource that was sent out today, more than 120 vans and cars with vaccination teams were sent out all over Samoa. Each of them had 200 vaccines. Now we're also speaking to some of those data specialists in the tent behind me just before, and they believe by the end of the day when all the data comes in, they think that about 6,000 people in total were vaccinated.
We know that there has been some reluctance from some parents to get their children vaccinated. What about the older people in your story?
Well, we heard from the Prime Minister just before in the tents behind me about this. The focus until now has really been on the children, that very vulnerable age group of 6 months to 4 years old, where the majority of those who have died have come out of. However, as of today, the vaccination teams will be targeting everybody. Anyone who needs a jab will ideally get one. And the first man that we spoke to in our story, in fact, all of his children had got vaccinated. He was the only one left, which is why he was sort of standing at the side of the road waiting for the vaccination teams to arrive. But as I say, Lisa, from now on, everyone is the target age group. No one at this stage is planning to be left out.
Okay, so 2 more deaths overnight. What difference is the mass vaccination program going to make?
The sad thing, Lisa, is in the short run, it probably actually won't make too much of a difference to that really depressingly smallly rising death toll that's just day on day getting higher. 2 young children died in the last 24 hours. Now, the reason for this is that the jab, the vaccine, takes 2 weeks to actually kick in. So it's 2 weeks before you are effectively immunised from measles. So those who are who got the vaccination, got the jab today, they will only become immune just before Christmas. So you have to sort of push your dates out like that. So in the short term, a lot of people here are thinking that the death rate will sadly keep rising. But in the long run, certainly the people behind me in this tent complex are hoping that this will be what it takes to get this epidemic under control.
The Samoan Prime Minister, what did he have to say at his press conference today, particularly about the 8-month halt to the country's vaccination program?
Well, he said repeatedly that it was too early to be doing the blame game, as he described it, and he didn't really want to go into answering questions today. We also asked him about the ongoing civil court case, but as he said, as it is before the courts, he can't comment. He did say, however, that it was a tragic loss of life of the 2 kids who sparked that 8th month, the death of the 2 kids rather, who sparked that 8th month stand down of the vaccination vaccination program, but certainly from the authorities' perspectives here, they don't want to be talking about that at the moment to us. They are really keen to sort of get their message about vaccinations behind me. Actually, you might be hearing some clapping behind me, Lisa. That indicates they've actually just got over that 5,000 vaccination threshold, which they're clearly quite happy about, and that's also the message that the government is wanting to get out today, is that this is the time to get its population vaccinated and in time immune to measles.
So a lot of people will be interested in the story of little Frederick, who we've been talking about this week. He went home from New Zealand without his booster shot. Did he get vaccinated today?
Well, we went and visited Frederick and his father earlier today. When we arrived, the vaccination team hadn't come by, but we got a message later saying that they had. However, it gets a little bit more complicated than that, as when they went out and asked for the shots, the booster shot, the vaccination team said they only had the original MMR vaccination, not the booster shot that comes afterwards. So for little Frederick to get that booster shot, his family was told that they had to get in the car and go to a hospital, which is not at all what they wanted to be doing. The whole idea of him staying at home is so he could stay safe and be quarantined, and they were sort of pinning their hopes on the vaccination teams bringing the vaccines to them. So at this point it's a wait and see, where we're just trying to get confirmation as to whether he's gone to a hospital today or plans to go to a hospital, but sadly, as far as we know as of yet, he's not yet had his booster shot, which he so desperately needs in the middle of an increasingly more serious situation here in Samoa.
Thank you, Logan. Logan Church joining us live there from Apia. It is 21 minutes after 5. You're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Get in touch about anything you've heard on the program this evening. You can text us on 2101. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. The government's promising to push through new laws to help force down the price of petrol by mid-next year. A final report by the Commerce Commission into the retail fuel market has found industry profits are higher than they should be for a competitive market. The recommendations focus on changes at the wholesale level and include adopting an enforceable industry code of conduct, clamping down on restrictive contracts between the main fuel companies and the smaller players which resell the fuel, introducing a more transparent pricing regime and improving information for drivers. So what does that actually mean for you at the pump? Well, Consumer Affairs Minister Chris Fafoy joins us now. Good evening, Minister. So 11 recommendations from this final report. How many of those 11 are you committed to making happen?
Most of them. We're still yet to take those detailed recommendations to Cabinet, but we saw the report a little bit before it came out, and we're able to work through what in principle we will commit to. Obviously the substantive changes around the wholesale market, which will free up some of those smaller distributors, I think, to increase the level of competition at the retail level will help, and we think we've got clear evidence that when competition does come to a market or come to a location, that prices head south.
So when you say most of them, how many are you thinking? How many of the 11?
Oh, look, again, Lisa, I think the substantive ones, we're yet to kind of go through the Cabinet process in detail with all of them, but we will do that. But the substantive ones, as I say.
The reason I ask, Minister, is the report itself says that the recommendations are interdependent, and in order for them to work, they're a package. So it's kind of an issue of committing to them all or no guarantee that it's going to work.
Well, that might be the case, but we haven't actually gone through the Cabinet process. We have discussed the substantive ones, which you've already outlined. So we'll make sure we do that with colleagues and go through it in much more detail now that the report is released. But as I say, we've committed to the substantive ones that we think will make a big difference to what will happen at the local level.
Why wouldn't you commit to them all, having gone through this whole lengthy process?
Because I think Cabinet needs to take some time. It's the first market study we've done. We'll get some more detail and analysis of the final report and those recommendations from officials, and give some time to Cabinet to go through all of them. As I say, we had a discussion very briefly about the substantive recommendations that came out of the report, and as the Prime Minister said some months ago, we're committed to making sure that we put these in swiftly, which is why we'll have some ledge approach early next year and hopefully passed by the middle of next year to make some of these substantive changes, especially to the wholesale market.
Okay, so how much cheaper? Because this is what everyone wants to know.
Yeah.
How much cheaper is it going to make petrol at the pump?
Look, I think we can only go off the gauge of what's happened when there has been competition introduced to some areas. The examples that I've been using today, which is clear evidence that they do head south, is the likes of Wellsford. When Gull came to town, the prices dropped there by 18 cents a litre, and then at the other end of the spectrum, Waitomo opened up an upper hut here in May. They started off there offering 32 cents a litre cheaper than the others in the area, and mysteriously they dropped their prices by 32 cents a litre. And I think that's the kind of thing that we're trying to encourage with increased competition, which the wholesale market is a barrier to that at the moment.
Okay, so that's when an extra player has entered the market, because if you look at the fine print in this report, which I'm sure you have, it says there hasn't been a cost-benefit analysis. So they're saying that potentially you, the government, might want to do a cost-benefit analysis as part of the decision-making process, because the reality is, Minister, you don't know how much this will save people or if it will save people anything at the pump, do you?
Well, it's going to be an art, not a science, and we can't set the prices. That's not what this is about. Again, it's another reason why we take the recommendations to Cabinet and have a good think about them, rather than just saying yes 2 days after we get them. But again, what we're trying to encourage is competition in the retail market. The Commerce Commission has given us a clear steer that the issue for them to ensure there is increased competition is unlocking some of the potential in the wholesale market, so the likes of Gull, the likes of Waitomo, the likes of NPD can actually play a bigger role at the retail end of the spectrum.
Okay, so when we look at some of those recommendations, one of them, this terminal gate pricing, and if we put it in plain English, basically you're trying to create a spot market like we have for electricity. Are you going to make that mandatory, terminal gate pricing?
Well, that's certainly part of the substantive change or recommendation that the Commerce Commission has made. We've agreed in principle to commit to that, because that's part of the package, as you say, that unlocks the wholesale market to some of these smaller players. There are other issues around some of the contracts that some of these smaller players are locked into at the moment with some of the bigger players, which do again restrict their ability to play a bigger part at the retail end. And again, we're committing to dealing with those.
Locked into those contracts for how long, Minister?
For some time, what I've been told, and again this comes out of the Commission, Commerce Commission's report, sometimes it can be 10 or 15 years that they're locked into some of those arrangements. It also has exclusivity, so if you buy petrol off one, you can't buy petrol off another. That obviously dictates which price you pay for quite a long time, and again that's been a barrier for what they can do at the retail end. So that's why the Commerce Commission has come back to us and said, actually, if you deal to this, we can see some more competition at the retail end.
So if you change the law next year, as you intend to do, companies that are locked into 10 to 15-year contracts, they'll just, will they have to run those contracts down, or will whatever you do null and void those contracts?
Well, MB will work very closely with those stakeholders in the market to understand exactly where some of those contracts are. So some work is still to be done to ascertain exactly who's got which contracts and how long they've got to go, but they're seen as an impediment to increasing competition at the moment. And as I say, we've got some time to make sure we work through that, but we're committed to making sure that that can be that particular part of the recommendations is followed through.
So potentially we might not see change, even if you change the law for a decade. If people are locked into these contracts, that could be the reality, couldn't it, Minister?
Or new contracts can be made when the law changes midway through next year, which might unlock some of this. There's also some, again, assessment of where things are at the moment and what contracts may or may not be able to amend it or entered into from when the law changes to unlock some of that potential in the wholesale market, and again, to deal with issues that, when consumers are at the petrol pump.
So realistically, when is petrol at the pump going to go down in price?
Look, we're hoping to change that legislation by mid-next year. We're going to have to work very closely with the industry about what that means.
And the flow-on from that will reach the pump when, do you think?
Well, look, I would hope that if we can change the terminal gate pricing and deal to the contracting issues which we've just been talking about, that it happens soon after. The terminal gate pricing and the ability to get in there and buy at a competitive price again is something that those small distributors haven't been able to do. If we change that law and we can bring it in quickly, then hopefully we'd see some changes soon after.
Before you go, Minister, will TVNZ merge with Radio New Zealand to make one super state broadcaster?
You'll have to wait. That's another one where you'll have to wait for Cabinet to make a decision.
And will that be at the final Cabinet meeting of the year, Minister? Will we have a decision after that?
Well, we said pretty clearly we hope to do that before Christmas, and that's still the intent.
Can you give us some clues?
No. You're going to have to wait.
All right, thanks for joining us. That is Chris Farfoy joining us from our studio at Parliament. PHARMAC funded research into whether people with epilepsy were imagining side effects from a medicine brand change has been suspended after 4 deaths were linked to the switch. The research included a video sent to patients as part of research into the nocebo effect, where patients suffer side effects brought on by a mistaken belief that their medication isn't working properly. The video was pulled and the research suspended yesterday after anger in the epilepsy community. Investigative reporter Guyon Espiner has more.
A video sent to patients with epilepsy was intended to help, but it's angered many.
Sometimes when a medicine changes, people begin to report new side effects. Research has shown that these are not always caused by the new medicine brand, but by what is known as the nocebo effect.
It was part of research into the nocebo effect.
The nocebo effect occurs when you switch to a new brand and are naturally on the lookout for side effects or symptoms that you wouldn't normally pay attention to.
But people with epilepsy, like Emma Black, are furious at being told their side effects can be put down to their anxiety about switching to a generic.
For anybody who saw me during the time where I was suffering from the side effects, they would all agree there was no way that the physical side effects I was having was in my mind.
The psychologist and HR consultant says she was outraged after seeing the video.
I felt like we were part of some sort of perverse science experiment. When the video said, it's all in your head, don't worry about it, the side effects you'll experience are normal or they're caused by you thinking about it too much. It made light of a situation that's really serious.
Laura Hume, a 27-year-old who's had epilepsy since the age of 5, says she lost her job after changing medicines. She says it was very real and not a nocebo effect.
I just got a new job and I thought it was the stress of that. So 3 months into my job, which was my first job ever, I actually had to quit because of the stress and the seizures, and I went from probably about 10 seizures a day to 40 within a short period of time.
PHARMAC would not be interviewed for this story, but says it commissioned the video and research to support the lamotrigine brand change back in March. It said the research had ethics approval and looked at whether a text message sent to patients informing them of an upcoming change to their medicine has a positive impact on their acceptance of the change in brand. Some study participants were provided a link to the video to watch.
Physical symptoms like fatigue or headaches are very common and can easily be mistaken for side effects of a new drug.
It said the video was not intended to be widely distributed into the public domain, rather was aimed at people who'd provided informed consent to participate in the study. Emails obtained by RNZ show PHARMAC manager Adam McRae wrote to Epilepsy New Zealand on Wednesday saying the video link had been pulled down and the research stopped.
In the context of significant public concern around the lamotrigine brand change, including the recent media coverage, the research has been ceased and the video content removed.
The decision was made after a complaint by Epilepsy New Zealand Chief Executive Ross Smith about the video, which was voiced by Wallace Chapman in his private capacity outside his work as an RNZ presenter. In a bid to save $30 million over 5 years, PHARMAC pulled funding for the Lamictal and Arrow brands of lamotrigine, forcing about 90% of the 11,000 people on the drug to switch to a generic form called Logum. PHARMAC then backed down last month and said that in most cases it would pay for people to stay on their original brand. The research into the nocebo effect of generic medicines was carried out by Professor Keith Petrie at Auckland University. Professor Petrie did not want to be interviewed but said in an email that it was the university's call to suspend the research. His words here have been voiced.
Anti-PHARMAC activists had spread the video on social media potentially to people who would have been in the study, thus compromising our research design.
Arabella Gube, who has a 4-year-old with epilepsy and has been an advocate for patients forced to switch brands, believed the video could have been dangerous in attributing headaches and fatigue to the nocebo effect.
For a lot of patients, that is a sign that you're about to have a seizure. And I'm tremendously concerned that people have watched the video, they're getting in their cars with little kids and thinking this is nocebo and not realising that it's actually an aura and they may be about to have a seizure.
PHARMAC says it's critical that people who have been prescribed Logum do not stop taking it. They say that for most people taking the medicine, Logum works in the same way as the other 2 lamotrigine brands that were previously funded. For Checkpoint, ko Gaian Espana tēnei.
Coming up on Checkpoint on RNZ National, the woman dubbed the Black Widow wins the right to get her dead husband's body parts retested. Going into the unknown, the Pike River re-entry team prepares to enter uncharted territory, and the worrying trends revealed by New Zealand's porn habits. We'd love your feedback on anything you've heard on the program this evening, the changes that we are expecting to laws that will, the government says, make petrol cheaper. 2101 is the text. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Do you think it will make any real difference to you? Let's go now to the headlines with Susanna.
About 200 Wakatipu High School students are being evacuated from a campsite near Skippers Canyon as heavy rain continues to deluge inland Otago. The Year 10 pupils have been on a 12-day trip to Branches Camp since last Friday, but it's been cut short due to rising river and lake levels. Met Service is predicting 200 millimetres more rainfall near the Otago headwaters by Saturday morning. An Alaskan tramper almost swept to his death in a Tasman river says he's never seen a river respond so quickly to rain as it did on Tuesday. Chris Muse was swept downstream after trying to cross a tributary of the Motueka River. His personal locator beacon sent a message to his local rescue service in Texas, which then informed the New Zealand Rescue Coordination Centre. The AA says a proposal to force fuel companies to display the price of their premium grade fuel on the forecourt should mean motorists paying less in the long run. It is one of a raft of recommendations by the Commerce Commission to make the fuel sector more competitive after it found consumers may be paying too much at the pump. AA spokesperson Mark Stockdale says the association has long called for prices to be displayed in a transparent way. Samoa's Prime Minister says 10,000 measles vaccines have been distributed, but data crunchers say only 5,000 or 6,000 needles have been used. The country is locked down today with all private cars off the roads and businesses closed as vans deliver vaccines to people's homes. A nurse has told RNZ she immunised 60 people in 2.5 hours, but data so far suggests it's unlikely the government will reach its goal of 90% coverage. Epilepsy patients' anger at being told symptoms are all in their heads has led to Auckland University pulling its PHARMAC-funded research about the nocebo effect. It follows suspicions that 4 deaths and 50 other adverse reactions were linked to a controversial brand switch by PHARMAC to one generic medication, Logum. As part of the nocebo research, patients were sent a video suggesting side effects are the result of a mistaken belief that the new medicine is inferior. PHARMAC backed down on the switch last month. Those are the latest news headlines from RNZ National. Our next news and weather update is at 6.
Thanks, Susanna. This is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. The Reserve Bank is going ahead with a plan to make banks hold significantly more capital to back their loans. The decision is estimated to cost the banks $20 billion as an expected to increase lending rates. But the Reserve Bank is adamant that the move is needed to make the country's financial system stronger and safer in the event of a major crisis. Business reporter Madison Reedy has the details.
The Reserve Bank was always determined to make the banking sector, especially the dominant Big Four Australian-owned banks, have more of their own money backing their businesses. At the moment, banks must hold at least $10.50 for every $100 they have in loans. For the big banks, that will rise to a minimum of $18 and the smaller banks $16. The Reserve Bank Governor, Adrian Orr, says this will make New Zealand's banking system safer and more resilient to withstand another financial crisis.
Our decisions to raise bank capital requirements are about making the banking system safer for all New Zealanders. It's well known that bank crises cause significant economic harm that have long-lasting consequences. They also cause very distressful situations for both physical and mental health through financial ruin.
The Reserve Bank has made some concessions. The banks will be able to use a broader mix of financial instruments to make up that capital, and they'll have 7 years to make the changes from the original 5. Mr Orr has long maintained the banks can pay for this by keeping more of their profits in New Zealand by paying less to their Australian shareholders. But the banks responded with threats of credit restrictions for riskier borrowers, such as farmers and small businesses, increased interest rates on loans or cutting deposit rates, and possible cutbacks on operations. The Chief Executive of the Bankers Association, Roger Beaumont, says the banks are pleased there's now clarity, but maintains there will be a cost to customers.
Oh, look, I think you'd need to take that up with the specific banks that have made those claims. But, I think this is a significant change to the capital ratio requirements of New Zealand's banks, but there will inevitably be some flow-on economic and business and customer costs to these changes.
Farmers are worried that they'll be the hardest hit by the capital change, as banks are already cutting their lending to the risky agricultural sector. Federated Farmers President Andrew Hoggard says the banks shouldn't lump the extra costs on farmers.
It's not like the banks are going broke. They're all making quite healthy profits, paying pretty good dividends to their shareholders. We think they should be able to absorb, these are costs of doing business, and we'd expect them to be able to absorb some of these costs.
Former Reserve Bank senior official Michael Riddell says such changes were never needed in the first place.
We've got a banking system that's been robust over 100 years without a financial crisis, with materially lower capital ratios than what the Reserve Bank's proposing. We came through the so-called global financial crisis barely scathed. Loan losses picked up, but the banks were well able to manage that. And, from what I've seen of what the banks published today, they still haven't published, good, strong, robust engagement with points like that.
But the Governor, Adrian Orr, wants to make it clear to consumers and lenders that this is for the best.
Their banks will be safer through time. The banks will be able to absorb more downtimes than ever before, and that it's a more competitive banking system.
The Reserve Bank will check up on the bank's capital moves annually for the next 7 years to ensure they're doing what they're told. For Checkpoint, I'm Madison Reedy.
And in a double dose of business, Nona Peltier joins me in the studio. Nona, so on other matters business, Fonterra has raised its Farmgate milk price and is reporting an improved first quarter profit. So what kind of numbers are we talking?
We're talking about 25 cents rise to the midpoint of their Farmgate milk price payout for this coming season. So you're looking at $7.30 is now the midpoint range, and the range is $7 to $7.60. That's a big improvement for farmers, and they certainly will be happy to hear that because they've had some tough years. And this is about the best price they've had in, 3 years. So we're getting up there near record highs for farmers, and that's great news for those communities. I think it puts something like about $11 billion into the economy, so it's a significant amount for sure. And at the same time, the company updated us with their first quarter numbers for a period. Those are the first 3 months of their financial year, which ended in October. So they... incredible numbers we're talking here. So last year, their underlying profit before interest and tax was $26 million for the first quarter. This time around, it's $259. So that's like a near tenfold increase. Big improvement there. Now, those are net numbers. The better number that they like to look at was what they call the normalized earning. And that is also at $171 million. So that's still quite good. And that also compares, believe it or not, with $26 million the year before. What are they putting it down to? Well, just improved margins. They're doing things better. They cut costs quite a lot, over $100 million, and that cost 700 jobs in the first quarter. So it's coming with some belt tightening for sure. They have created some additional jobs, but they've become a much more consumer-focused company. They're all about the milk, as you can imagine. That's what they do. So anyways, look, I'll tell you what, the farmers seem to really like it because the Fonterra has two different kinds of shares listed on the market. One of the shares are the kind that you and I could buy, and the others would be that farmers could buy. Now, the one that you and I could buy, well, those share prices actually dropped 0.5% today by 2 cents. But where it comes to the co-op shares, which the farmers can buy, that rose 1.5% by 6 cents. So the farmers obviously thought more of what Fonterra's performance was than the general public, from the sound of it.
Okay, let's move to Tilt Renewables. So it's selling the biggest wind farm in Australia for more than $1 billion. What's that deal about?
Yeah, so it's a wind farm called Snowtown 2. Now, there is no Snowtown 1. I don't know why it's called Snowtown if it's a windy place, but there you go. Anyhow, they're selling it for about, 1.1 billion Australian dollars. And from that, they're going to, the proceeds of that sale, once everything is, tallied up, it's going to be like about 455 million Australian dollars. That's a lot of money. Now, they're not sure exactly what they're going to spend that money on. They're already working on a number of other wind farm projects in Australia as well as here in New Zealand. That company is it's owned really by Infratil, and Mercury have the biggest share of that company. That share price, it went up 7% today. So that was big numbers. And just because we talked about fuel prices before, Z Energy dropped 0.5% down 2 cents there. So anyways.
Okay. Well, should we do a quick twirl of the markets?
Yeah, why not?
Generally,
so the NZX Top 50 Index had a heck of a good morning, but it sort of finished down from there. It was up, but it still finished up nearly 0.5%, a 48-point gain to 11,258. And the New Zealand dollar is holding quite well at 65.4 US cents, and that sentiment, I guess, would have been helped by just the confidence in the financial sector here with the Reserve Bank's decision. 95.6 Australian and 49.8 British pence. There you go.
Thanks, Nona. Nona Peltier with our business news. The woman known as the Black Widow has won the right to have body samples of her dead husband released so they can be retested. Helen Milner was jailed for life in 2014 and ordered to spend at least 17 years in prison for poisoning Philip Nisbet in 2009, so she could get her hands on a $250,000 life insurance payout. A decade on, the Court of Appeal has today granted Milner's request to get body samples released from ESR and sent to Australia for forensic testing. Jonathan Mitchell reports.
Philip Nisbet's death was initially treated as a suicide, but the case was reopened in 2011 after an investigation by his sister, Leanne Cartier, and an inquest. The family had asked for his remains to be returned to them, but now there's little hope of that. Ms Cartier says the family is devastated by the ruling and feels re-victimised.
This is the last part of Phil, and they're allowing it to be violated, to do tests that are totally unfounded and a wild goose chase.
She says it's especially hard for her dead brother's children.
When do my nephews get to put this to rest? Then my youngest nephew this has been going on. This is getting close to half his life with this nightmare and the court system and everything else.
Having lost an appeal against her conviction, Helen Milner now wants to apply to the Governor-General to exercise the royal prerogative of mercy. Her legal team will attempt to argue Mr Nesbitt may not have taken enough poison to kill him, but died as a result of a latent heart condition. A victim advocate, Ruth Money, says the court decision has wider implications.
It's a pretty slippery slope. You know, you lose your loved one to crime, but you're also now losing the samples and the body parts. They're going to be withheld from you. So it's a double whammy. You lose the person, but you also lose the parts.
She says the overseas testing is basically now a fishing expedition.
They know these tests will be unreliable. They say that in their submissions, but they're still now going to go ahead with them. So, yes, we don't have to wait for a decision around access to body parts anymore, but there's still going to be ongoing traumatisation of the family at the hands of the person who murdered their loved one.
Leanne Cartier's lawyer, Nikki Pender, says the action taken by Milner is mischievous.
One of the things they're looking to do is to retest blood samples for the levels of promethazine in there to see whether they are consistent with the toxicology results that were used at trial. Yet their own expert says, well, we know that over time those blood samples will have degraded to the point where there's unlikely to be any promethazine left in them.
She says there's unlikely to be an appeal to today's ruling, but the family can still have a say.
So any test results, to the extent that they may wish to use them in support of an application for mercy, I think the family would wish to be involved in that process and to be given the right to make submissions and to maybe even cross-examine the expert witness that they're relying on.
RNZ has attempted to contact Helen Milner's lawyer, Rupert Glover, for comment. For Checkpoint, call Jonathan Mitchell, Tēnei.
It's about 10 minutes to 6. I'm Lisa Owen and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Many Ngapuhi leaders are doubtful the Crown's renewed effort to get its treaty settlement back on track will work and are furious they've been given just days' notice before an open hui about a way forward. The government announced yesterday that it no longer recognises the mandate of Tū Horonuku, opening the door for a new group to negotiate the settlement. But many hapu remain unconvinced they will be listened to. Te Aniwa Hurihanganui reports.
It's back to the drawing board for the country's biggest iwi, which has not been able to reach a settlement with the Crown for a decade. Treaty Negotiations Minister Andrew Little says he will no longer work with Tū Horonuku, the group the Crown initially recognised as having the mandate to negotiate the Ngapuhi settlement.
It was pretty clear to me as Minister we weren't going to make progress with the current Tū Horonuku mandate. We'll put the feelers out to Takiwā and other groups of hapu about getting their mandates. One thing I'm very clear about, however, is that issues that are common to every hapu of Ngapuhi, issues like he whakaputanga, the social and economic policies that have caused deprivation. The Crown wants one conversation on those issues, not multiple conversations.
The move has been hailed by the government as a new opportunity, a fresh start for Takiwā and hapu to discuss how area-specific cultural redress should be negotiated and what a new mandate process should look like. But Te Uri Taniwha hapu representative, Hinerangi Himiona, says she's extremely frustrated because that is what hapu have been asking for years.
Where's the apology? Where's the acknowledgement of the huge cock-up that happened that was Tū Hono in the evolved mandate process? It was obvious back then that Tū Horonuku was not going to take us to the place that we wanted to be as Ngapuhi, and he also could have begun talking to the hapu and the natural groupings that we were and are and were prepared to become.
The evolved mandate model was rejected by 70 of Ngapuhi's 110 hapu last year. Te Whiu hapu representative Sam Napier says he can't believe the Treaty Negotiations Minister has now given hapu just 4 days' notice to meet with him about a new way forward.
The Minister need not think that he's Santa Claus coming down the chimney on Christmas Eve with this announcement. He has in fact given us 4 days' notice of a hui that he's called at Waitangi. That tells me that the Crown's attitude hasn't changed. They think because they whistle we Ngapuhi hapu rangatira will come running. It's when this Labour-led government starts showing respect for Ngapuhi hapu rangatiratanga, then I'll find some optimism.
Tūhoronuku stalwarts Sunny Tau and Hone Sadler both resigned as chair from the group this year. Sam Napier, also a former chair, says Tūhoronuku lost the backing of the iwi because it lost touch with the people at the grassroots.
Where we went wrong is we became out of touch with the hapu and grassroots of Ngapuhi. The Waitangi Tribunal essentially said that Tūhoronuku processes belittled Ngapuhi hapu rangatiratanga.
Treaty Negotiations Minister Andrew Little intends to meet with hapu and takiwā over the next 6 months. Ngāti Hine Chair Peter Tipene says many hapu have already been mobilising to be in a position to negotiate with the Crown.
Ngāti Hine's position is that we're moving ahead with our 9 hapu as a large natural grouping, and that's why we've gone out on the road and started talking to our people with or without the support of the government. Other large natural groupings are starting to emerge, and people have been working away in the background.
But he's not holding his breath that this renewed effort by the Crown will get the settlement back on track, and he has a word of warning for the minister this time around.
Do not continue to do what the government has been doing for the last 10 years, which is to dictate to Ngapuhi how we should configure ourselves and move forward together.
The government is also considering establishing a new Ngapuhi Sovereign Investment Fund to help provide assets which could be used in any agreement for redress with Ngapuhi. Mo te hōtaka o te ahiahi, ko te aniwa, hurihanga nui, aho.
An experienced hiker who was almost swept to his death in a Tasman river says it's the closest call he's ever had in the outdoors. Chris Muse, an outdoor guide in Alaska, was walking the South Island section of the Te Araroa Trail when he struck bad weather on Tuesday. Running low on food, he decided to push on but got in trouble when he stepped into a flooded stream near the Motueka River. He told our Nelson reporter Tracy Neal he realises now that it would have been wiser to go hungry than try to make the crossing.
I knew I was facing 5 more days of rain, and sort of looking at the flooding around me, I was almost out of food, and I had to make the judgment call to wait out or push forward. So I made 5 successful crossings, and on the 6th one, I was swept downriver. Then I found myself between the Motueka itself and that channel that I'd been swept down. So there was really no way to go back and no way to go forward, because the Motueka at that point was just at an insanely high level. You know, I've been hiking all over the world, and I've never been in an area that is so immediately responsive to rain the way the rivers are here. So the levels just rose dramatically at a rate that I've never seen before.
Chris, how far were you actually swept, and what were your tactics at that point for surviving?
So typically whenever I make a stream crossing that's formidable like that one, it's a good idea to unbuckle your pack. I have a hip belt and a chest strap just in case you get pinned down. You don't want to have that pack pushing you into the river. So first step is kind of unbuckle your pack and then scout the river stream that you're crossing for as long as you can to try to find the safest point to cross. And the safest point for me was sort of down below, right before it feeds into the Motueka, this stream. And a boulder, the flow was so high that a boulder was set loose in front of me and pushed me back. I lost my footing. Luckily, I found myself on my stomach, so I was able to execute a few solid swim strokes. And at the flow rate, it probably swept me 50, 70 meters downriver to the opposite side of the stream that I was on. And I was able to sort of cling to a boulder just before going into the Motueka, which would have ended in certain death given the flow. And so, I just knew that I needed to get down in the cross stream. That was my best option. This all happened within the span of 3 or 4 seconds. So time sort of slowed down a little bit, but a couple of good instincts kicked in, but also knew I was in a bad spot after that.
Chris, what were the instincts?
Just knowing how to execute some good swim strokes and not just to flail, and not to try to stand up, because if you're in swift water like that and you do lose your footing, you try to stand up, you can get your feet wedged underneath a rock, and then the force of the river will then push you down and drown you. So the way the arc of that stream was going, it threw me downriver and towards the opposite bank.
So you were lucky that you were able to obviously keep your backpack with you.
Yeah, that was a lifesaver, undoubtedly. I keep my GPS locator on my person in case I do lose my pack. But that had after the swim, I was soaked to the bones, and my pack itself is a big dry bag and a harness. So all of the gear that I needed to change into, my shelter and my sleeping bag and my backup clothes were dry. So if I had lost that, it would have been a very different situation. I very, very possibly could have died from exposure.
Is this the closest call you've ever had?
Yeah, absolutely. This is the closest call I've ever had. I've hiked solo thousands of miles, a couple of the big long trails in the States, and in Alaska as well. Been in some pretty isolated situations, but this was just sort of the perfect factors all put together, and I think also a big determining factor was my unfamiliarity with how the rivers respond here to heavy rain and flooding. If I had known that, I certainly would have not continued. I would have stayed put that morning.
And Chris was eventually rescued after setting off his emergency beacon, which alerted authorities in Texas, who then contacted the New Zealand rescuers. He's now recovering in St Arnaud in the Nelson Lakes National Park before continuing on the trail to Bluff. Very quickly, some of you have got in touch about the petrol prices. This person saying that they remember when premium prices were displayed.
RNZ News at 6. Ngā mihi nui ko Susana Leata with tēnei. Samoa's goal of vaccinating 90% of the country against measles by the end of tomorrow looks unlikely. 10,000 vaccines have gone out across Samoa today, but data crunchers say only 5,000 or 6,000 doses have been administered. The country has been in lockdown today with cars off the road and businesses closed. Over 100 vans are delivering vaccines to people at home. Red flags of all types have been draped and tied outside homes, indicating someone inside needs a jab. One nurse told RNZ she gave out 60 immunisations over a 2.5-hour period. A PHARMAC-funded study has been pulled after epilepsy patients expressed anger at being told their symptoms are all in their heads. The patients are caught up in a controversial brand switch after PHARMAC pulled funding for the Lamictal and Arrow brands of lamotrigine in October in favour of funding one generic medication, Logum. Guy Espina reports.
4 deaths and 50 other adverse reactions have been reported over suspicions they are linked to the switch. PHARMAC backed down last month, but as part of a nocebo effect study, some brand switch patients were sent a video which suggested that side effects are brought on by a mistaken belief that the new medicine is inferior. Epilepsy New Zealand complained, and yesterday the study and video was pulled. Researcher Professor Keith Petrie says it was only axed because anti-PHARMAC activists spread the video on social media, potentially compromising the study's design. Ko Guy Espina, TNA.
One of the smaller players in the fuel market is welcoming the Commerce Commission's recommendations to shake up the wholesale end of the supply chain. The competition watchdog wants a transparent pricing scheme to create a wholesale spot market and force suppliers to ring-fence minimum amounts of petrol to sell to smaller players. The government's indicated it'll act on the recommendations to help bring down prices for consumers. The managing director of Waitomo, Jimmy Ormsby, says it's positive news.
If Waitomo gets a more competitive wholesale fuel price, that'll be reflected in how competitive we are in the market. And we are quite keen to keep growing the business so that we'll be delivering more competitive fuel prices to Kiwis.
Jimmy Ormsby from Waitomo. The sister of a man murdered by a woman known as the Black Widow says it's disgusting and unfair that she has been allowed to drag out the court proceedings further. Helen Milner was jailed for life in 2014 and ordered to spend at least 17 years in prison for murdering Philip Nesbitt in 2009. His death was initially created as a suicide, but the case was reopened in 2011 after an investigation by Mr Nesbitt's sister, Leanne Cartier. Ms Cartier says the family feels let down by a Court of Appeal ruling today, allowing Milner's request to have ESR samples sent to Australia for testing.
Get her a toothbrush and send her to clean the toilet. You know, these people have got all this time on their hands, and from in there, and their lawyers are just earning a nice, healthy living from legal aid, playing these games.
Leanne Cartier says it's impossible for Mr Nesbitt's sons and other family members to get on with their lives with the constant threat of more legal action. Wellington's regional and city councils are considering massively fast-tracking funding for a multi-billion-dollar plan to fix Wellington's congestion problems. Funding for the $6.4 billion Let's Get Wellington Moving plan is to be split roughly 60-40 between central government and the councils. The two councils are meeting next week to consider bringing forward funding for the next 2 years on top of what's already allocated. Wellington City's share is set to increase by nearly $16 million to $18.2 million, while the Regional Council will top up its contribution by an additional $8 million, taking its contribution to $11.5 million. Wellington's new Mayor Andy Foster says he has met with the Transport Minister Phil Twyford and the Regional Council Chair for a constructive meeting on accelerating the plan. The latest stage of the impeachment hearings into Donald Trump has underlined the depth of the partisan divide in the United States Congress. Constitutional scholars called by both sides testified on whether or not the president's actions met the definition of impeachable offences. Mr Trump has dismissed allegations that he sought Ukrainian help for his re-election campaign as a hoax. The BBC's Peter Bowes has more details.
According to the US Constitution, a president can be removed from office for treason, bribery or other high crimes and misdemeanours. But did Donald Trump's conduct in relation to his dealings with Ukraine meet that standard? 3 legal scholars chosen by the Democrats said yes, it did. One adding that if what they were talking about was not impeachable, then nothing was impeachable. A 4th legal expert selected by the Republicans disagreed, saying the process was being rushed and there was no clear case against President Trump.
Peter Bowes reporting. It's 6:05. Rugby Australia boss Raylene Castle has defended the organisation's settlement with Israel Folau as a commercial decision and necessary to avoid the cost and distraction of testing its inclusion policy in court. The rugby union and Folau announced yesterday they had settled their unfair dismissal case, ending a long and bitter dispute after the former Wallaby was sacked in May for a post on social media that hell awaits homosexuals and other groups. The settlement has been described as a humiliating surrender by Rugby Australia, with calls for Castle to resign. But Castle says she has no intention of quitting and the settlement is in the best interests of the game. 4-time world champions Peter Burling and Blair Tuke have finished second after the initial round of qualifying at the 49er World Sailing Champs being sailed off Auckland. Fellow New Zealanders Logan Beck and Oscar Gunn finished 6th and Isaac McCarty and William Mackenzie 22nd. The top 25 boats now join Gold Fleet Racing on Friday, with the best of the fleet moving on to the medal races on Sunday. The New Zealand fast bowling great Sir Richard Hadlee has paid tribute to one of his long-time adversaries and fellow fast bowler, England's Bob Willis, who has died at the age of 70 after a short illness. Sir Richard, who is New Zealand's leading Test wicket taker, says Willis, who played for England for over a decade in the 70s and 80s, was one of the great fast bowlers of his time. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, Alison Balance is on the trail of the Pacific golden plover. They've been flying into New Zealand without a visa for thousands of years. The big news is we now know where they're coming from. Peggy Revell on the convoluted flight plans of Canadian politicians, and we have a window on the world of China's largest theme park and home to over 100,000 people. It ain't Mickey Mouse. On Nights with me, Brian Crump, after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. Northland to Waikato, Coromandel, Bay of Plenty and Taupo. Mainly fine, cloud increasing early in the morning and at night isolated showers during the afternoon. Waitomo to Whanganui, including Taranaki, Taumaranui and Taihape. A few showers tonight, mainly fine tomorrow. Manawatu, also Gisborne and Wairarapa, fine weather. Horowhenua to Wellington, cloudy periods tomorrow with a few showers. Westland, Fiordland, Canterbury High Country and Otago Lakes. Periods of rain with heavy falls and possible thunderstorms. Nelson, Marlborough and the remainder of Canterbury, mainly fine. High cloud increasing tomorrow with a few spots of rain. For central Otago, Dunedin and Clutha, cloudy periods and isolated showers becoming more widespread for a time tomorrow when some could be very heavy. Southland showers, some heavy with possible thunderstorms from midday tomorrow. Chatham Islands, mainly fine. RNZ National. It's 6:08.
Thanks, Susanna. If you're just tuning in, this is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. Returning to Samoa now, where just 5,000 people were vaccinated today as the medical teams raced against time to vaccinate the country's population against measles. People were told to stay at home today between the hours of 7 a.m. and 5 p.m. and roads were closed to non-essential services as medical teams travelled around the country vaccinating the young and old in their homes. Those who hadn't been vaccinated were told to leave something red outside their homes so that the medical teams would know if they needed a measles immunisation. But it seems the nation has a long way to go to reach its vaccination target. Our reporters Alex Perrottet and Logan Church were with the mobile medical teams today, and Alex joins us now live. Alex, the Samoan Prime Minister, Tuia Lepa Sailele Male e Lenga Oi, said a short time ago that about 5,000 people had been vaccinated today. That seems like slow progress. Will they have to have more shutdowns?
That's a question I put to the Prime Minister, Lisa. It's just gone past 7 o'clock here, I believe, and there's cars on the road, and that's been a bit of a weird thing because it's just been an absolute deserted place, the whole country, all day. So it's just a bit weird seeing cars moving on the road, and if you're watching, you can see them file past me. But we had, before long ago, a press conference, a second press conference with the Prime Minister today. He called it was urgent. And then he announced that there was, at that stage, about 4,500. We've just been talking to the data crunchers who are winding up their shop at the moment, and it's just gone over 5,500 vaccines. And they're expecting over 6,000 to be recorded by the end of the day because the data's still coming in. So if you did the same tomorrow, it'd be 12,000. 12,000 in 2 days, a far cry from the 90% take-up that the Prime Minister wanted. I put that question to him, and his first words were, well, we must be realistic about this. And then he started talking in the language more of weeks rather than days. So then I said, look, should we have another one of these? It seems to be pretty effective. On the whole, people are pretty obedient and stayed off the roads. Could we do another day or two next week? Could it be a more regular thing? He said, no, not at this stage, but he's not ruling it out. So we might see more government shutdowns. Who knows how long this crisis is going to play out for.
You followed the team, so I'm assuming they went to the easiest to reach places first as well.
They did. And Lisa, I don't know, you might get the impression, the idea that here in Samoa, the most affected places are going to be the most remote areas because people can't actually get into the hospitals or to the capital to get an immunisation. But actually some of the hotspots, as we know, most of the deaths have been here in the capital, and this is where it spread from, this is where it arrived and spread out from. So a lot of them were the inner suburb /villages of Apia. So Whaleata was a place that we went to, Vaimonga. These are sort of suburbs, and some of them newer suburbs and quite well-to-do areas for the standards here, and lots and lots of red flags around. So interesting to see those red flags, and interesting to see lots and lots of vans. Logan and I pretty much were driving around stalking them and following them and getting footage and talking to a lot of police as well. But the Prime Minister did say again tonight that tomorrow they will focus more on the remote areas, but keep in mind that this is the epicentre and this is where today's focus was.
Also today, obviously, questions are being raised about who should be held responsible for the outbreak and the response to it, particularly when the vaccination program was suspended. Well, the Samoan Prime Minister today said it was a visitor from New Zealand who brought the measles to Samoa. What else did he have to say?
Well, he doesn't want... He sounded a little bit like Winston Peters speaking to you the other night. He did not want to get into the blame game. He started waxing lyrical, as he tends to do, to try to get a few laughs here and charm the local journalist. He was saying, and the international ones for that matter, but he was saying, you've all read the Bible, you all know the story about Adam and Eve and the snake and everyone pointing the finger at each other. We're not going to get into that now. I only want questions based on the results today, the progress that we're making. But I'm talking to people around the country and there's a lot of negativity. You heard our story last night about the two families who are suing the health ministry because of the original botched vaccinations that were mixed incorrectly last year, and he wouldn't really want to talk about that because it's in front of the courts, but I'm talking to people that say that at the very least this Prime Minister, this government has been massively let down by its health ministry, and there would be a lot more pressure put on this government and this Prime Minister if there was a decent opposition. There's one opposition MP. He was on the front pages today saying, and crying really, saying, we have failed you. All branches of government have failed you and we have to make amends. The Prime Minister didn't want to buy into that. He said it was political.
So what happens tomorrow, last day of the shutdown?
It's the second and the last day of the shutdown. I asked the Prime Minister whether there will be anything different. He gave a wishy-washy answer. It doesn't seem there'll be anything different. Again, from about 6 a.m, right behind me, if you're watching, you can see over my right shoulder, the vans lined up there of the National Emergency Operations Centre. All the government vehicles will be streaming out from there. It was an absolute scrum there this morning from 6 o'clock in the morning. At 7 o'clock, but by 7 o'clock, they're all out of there, going out across the country. They'll probably need more resources, more people coming on board as drivers, as data entry clerks, the immunisers themselves, plus those village reps, particularly tomorrow going into the more remote areas. The village representatives are really important to be able to connect with the villagers and to coerce them. Well, there may be a bit of coercion. I was going to say to coax, but it is compulsory, so we'll have to see. Obviously, permission must be given by parents for children, but they've all been told it is compulsory and everyone must get the jab. I don't think we're going to get to 90% tomorrow, but they're going to be hoping here that there's a whole lot more that were immunised today.
Thanks, Alex. Alex Perrottet joining us live from Apia there. As you were saying, they reached about 5,000 vaccinations today, roughly, and hoping to do the same again. But as Alex was saying, that will fall well short of the numbers that they need. The shutdown is not being extended at this point. The Commerce Commission has confirmed what many drivers already suspected. They're probably paying too much at the petrol pump. The competition watchdog says the big fuel companies' stranglehold over supply means at the retail end of the market, consumers are paying higher than expected prices for petrol and diesel. It's recommended a raft of changes to increase competition and lower prices at the pump, and the government's already indicated it's prepared to act. Our reporter Sarah Robson has the details.
On the streets of Auckland, drivers agreed that a trip to the petrol station really hits the pocket.
A rip-off, man. Total rip-off.
Too high.
Shockingly high. Too high. Way too high.
Yeah, they're pretty up there, right? And all over the place.
And after its year-long fuel market study, the Commerce Commission has reached the same conclusion. New Zealanders are probably paying too much for fuel.
Fuel companies are earning rates of return that are higher than we would expect in a workably competitive market, where the forces of competition generally work to deliver lower prices for consumers. What we're saying is that we consider that those forces could be working better and could ultimately be delivering a lower level of profitability and lower prices to consumers.
That's Commerce Commissioner Anna Rawlings. She says the big problem is the lack of competition at the wholesale end of the market, and it's recommending a shake-up. That includes bringing in a transparent pricing scheme aimed at creating a wholesale spot market, which could also force suppliers to ring-fence minimum amounts of petrol to sell to smaller players. For the managing director of one of those smaller companies, Waitomo's Jimmy Ormsby, it's positive news.
If Waitomo gets a more competitive wholesale fuel price, that'll be reflected in how competitive we are in the market, and we are quite keen to keep growing the business so that we'll be delivering more competitive fuel prices to Kiwis.
But the Commerce Commission also found problems at the petrol pump. It says there's an increasing price difference between regular and premium petrol, which isn't explained by cost differences. It wants premium prices displayed on the boards outside petrol stations, something Mark Stockdale from the AA says they've been calling for years. He says motorists filling up with 95 or 98 unleaded are paying too much because of a lack of transparency and competition.
We've heard stories where the price can be 40 or 50 cents a litre more than 91 octane, and that is simply not justified. It does not cost that much more to actually manufacture, so motorists are being ripped off when it comes to premium petrol in particular.
The Commerce Commission says some motorists could be buying premium petrol unnecessarily. It wants stickers on fuel caps so people know what grade of petrol their car needs, something Mark Stockdale says will be helpful.
You certainly don't want to put in a lower octane than the car requires. That can cause serious engine damage. But if, in fact, your car only requires 91 octane and you're putting in high octane because you don't know that, then it would be good to know.
And that could reduce their petrol costs, which would be a welcome relief for this Christchurch motorist.
95 is definitely the best for our car, but we'd normally just go 91 because it's cheaper.
Mike Bennett from Z Energy says his company is more than willing to be transparent about its premium fuel prices and make changes to its boards. But he warns it will come at a cost.
It's going to cost us $2 million a year, so it's not cheap to do. We've thought about doing that in the past, but again, it'd be one of those things where we would do what we think is right, and it would cost us $2 million, and no one else would do it.
The competition watchdog also looked at the discounts and loyalty schemes being offered by many of the major fuel companies. The companies said the increase in the number of sales made at a discount and the increasing size of those discounts was a sign of strong retail competition. But the Commerce Commission disagreed, saying it's a poor substitute for more general price competition. And this motorist backs that.
Well, they're all pretty low amounts, aren't they? So even if you fill the car, you're getting something like a maximum of $4 back. So in general, I don't think loyalty schemes are that good. You should just get the discount anyway.
The government has already signalled it will look at making changes to try and break the stranglehold the big fuel players have on supply and encourage more competition. Mo te hōtaka o te ahi, ko Sarah Robson, aho.
It's almost 20 minutes past 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. The chief censor is concerned about the rise in popularity of simulated incest porn online and videos with non-consensual behaviour. The Office of Film and Literature Classification has released a study of the 200 most watched online porn videos. Hamish Cardwell reports.
New Zealanders' porn preferences have been exposed in new research released today by Chief Censor David Shanks, and it makes for revealing reading. Analysis of the huge online porn site Pornhub found that New Zealanders generally prefer content not classified as extreme. But Mr. Shanks says there are some worrying trends. One is that 46% of the most viewed videos featured a narrative of sex between step-siblings or between stepchildren and parents.
Look, it's deeply problematic and given that context, and it's particularly problematic for young people, but potentially not only for young people.
In many of these videos, initial refusals of sexual activity would be overcome by pressure or persistence by a partner. This theme carried through in another trend. 35% of the most popular clips had some non-consensual behaviour in them, such as requests to stop or signs of resistance.
That is a very problematic message unless you understand what it is that you're looking at and the intention of it.
Porn researcher and sex therapist Jo Robertson says she's deeply saddened but not surprised by the trends. She says unfortunately the research shows that young people use porn as sex education.
If you've got your 15-year-old who's learning about how to have sex and pleasurable relationships or romantic relationships from porn, then essentially they're seeing something that was coercive, exploitative or non-consensual, but also had these incestual themes in it. This is very bad sex education.
The Executive Director of Rape Prevention Education, Debbie Tohill, says porn reinforces myths about rape.
The things that we often see in porn are things like, that women like to be raped or they like to be strangled, and that they suffer very few negative outcomes because of that. And I think that's really concerning.
She wants an age verification system brought in, which requires proof that someone's of age, similar to what's been looked at in the UK and Australia, something Mr. Shanks says he's open to.
That's a form of age verification, not just where you tick this if you're over 18, but that they actually, go through a more rigorous process for that.
The office also today released information to help parents talk to their children about porn. But Ms. Robertson says teachers, social workers, counsellors and nurses all desperately need better training too, and it has to start now.
There's kind of this context at the moment with all these adults sitting around having chats about what should we do and what's the strategy, and that's really important. But in the meantime, you've got year upon year of young people seeing really problematic content, asking for help, and us just literally still talking about it with each other.
The government has signalled it wants to toughen up rules to make it harder for children to access pornography. But Minister for Internal Affairs and Minister for Children Tracy Martin says right now its hands are tied.
Literally at the moment our regulatory system has no powers over this particular area, and that's just in many ways we're trying to run to keep up with the internet.
The Education Ministry says it's refreshing its guidelines on how to approach talking to students about pornography, along with piloting new toolkits in 1,000 classrooms in the first half of next year. For Checkpoint, ko Hamish Cardwell, tēnei.
The man heading the Pike River re-entry team reckons they'll be in uncharted territory in the mine by Christmas after getting the go-ahead from WorkSafe for the next phase of the manned re-entry. It will mean breaking the main seal at 170 metres and a team assessing and collecting forensic evidence along the mine tunnel to a large rockfall at the 2.3 kilometre mark, the end goal for the operation. 29 men died in the 2010 explosion and many families have been campaigning to re-enter the mine ever since. Dingy Pattinson, the Chief Operating Officer for the Pike River Recovery Agency, explains what happens next.
We're putting fresh air up the tunnel now. That's the first stage, because you've got to have fresh air on the other side of a wall. So we're doing that. That'll take us till the end of this week, most likely. Then we want to leave it for a period of about 7 days to settle down, because once you start interfering with the environment and gases underground, before you actually put people in there, you want to know that it's actually stable and safe again. So we'll leave it for 7 days and we'll monitor it and we'll ensure that it's stabilised again and it's safe. Only then will we then open up the wall and actually send people in.
So likely to happen before Christmas then?
If all goes well, yes.
Okay. So how many people will go into that part of the mine?
Look, it's the same as what we've planned all along, the same as what we used when we went in the 30-metre seal. So the first group of people will go in, and there'll only be most likely 3 or 4 statutory mining people to be able to go in first, do a hazard assessment of that first 20-metre zone, make sure it's safe, any hazards, then they'll come back out. If there's no hazards, another group will then go in and do a forensic search, scan of that 20 metres, and then, and only then, will we start removing the wall.
So going past the 170-metre mark, what are you expecting? Talk us through it, because we have Russell Smith's loader partway down there and other items. Walk us through it. What do you anticipate?
So what we'll be doing is it's going to be done in 20-metre increments. So every 20 metres, we will do a hazard assessment. We will then do a forensic search. We will then advance all our mining services and everything like that, because we've got to continue all our services all the way up the tunnel. We may have to do roof support in some areas, and we've got to advance all our air and water lines and everything like that. So it's not going to be a quick process. So it'll be 20 metres at a time. As we go up, as you said, I'm not expecting to find a great deal in the first 1,500 metres until we get to Russell Smith's loader. We know where that is. We know there's some robots along the way as well, so we know where they are, and we'll recover all those as well. And they'll all need to be part of the forensic search for the police as well, because they'll want the loader looked at and everything like that. So we'll be doing that. Once we get past the loader, the next milestone is really getting to pit bottom and stone, because we know in that area that there's a lot of electrical equipment stored in that area. That was where all the variable speed drives and the transformers are all kept. So that holds a lot of valuable information for us.
Have you found anything so far of particular interest?
No, not at all. We've done full forensic search from the entrance of the mine to the 170, and there was nothing found in that area.
So this will take you right up to what, the 2.3 mark, right? Roundabout?
Yeah, the Roxall plug is round about 2.3 kilometres into the tunnel, and we'll be going up as far as that.
And that's the commitment so far, to go that distance, if it could be done safely.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is.
So my question is, if you get through that bit, will you want to go further?
Look, our plan that we submitted to WorkSafe, it was a full detailed plan on getting to the Roxall plug. We indicated, and we've indicated all along, that it is our intention to get eyes on the rockfall. So that's another stage, is removing the Roxall plug and getting to the rockfall. And that's the full mandate of the agency. So, yeah, but will be more planning to be done in the future about how we remove the Roxall plug and how we get that last 20 metres to the rockfall.
Will you be satisfied to stop at that distance, though, is basically what I'm asking you, I suppose, Dingy. Will you...
Oh, look, that's our mandate, is to get to the rockfall. So, answer to me, if we get to the rockfall, we've achieved our objective.
Mandates do change, though, don't they? Do you anticipate that there will be a push to go further?
Oh, I don't know that. All I'm focused on at this stage is we've only just got our exemption, and we're at 170 metres mark. We've got to get to 2.3 kilometres. My focus at this stage is to make sure we get to that 3-kilometre mark safely.
And that's Dingy Pattinson, who is the Chief Operating Officer for the Pike River Recovery Agency. Just time for some of your feedback before you go. A number of you getting in touch about the petrol prices and the government's push to get legislation through next year that's aimed at lowering the price of petrol at the pump. Raymond's been in touch and says Jacinda Ardern and her government want to push recommendations that will help reduce the cost of petrol. So much for Ardern's nuclear-free moment. I have no doubt at all, should this move succeed, it will prove extremely popular with motorists, which makes you wonder how many people really care about carbon dioxide emissions and climate change. The cost of petrol may fall, but the price and damage to our environment will remain high, and it will probably increase. What a joke, says Raymond. And this one into saying that the money that motorists save on petrol, they can invest it in sandbags to keep the rising sea level out of their homes and businesses. Check out our stories online, and we'll talk again tomorrow.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. Thousands of doses of the measles vaccine are being administered in Samoa as the government races to have 90% of the population immunised by the weekend. Waitomo Fuel is welcoming the Commerce Commission's recommendations to shake up the wholesale end of the supply chain. And Wellington's regional and city councils are looking at a major fast track for funding of multi-billion-dollar Let's Get Wellington Moving transport plan. Those are the headlines. Our next news is at 7.
Take the pulse of the day's news every weeknight at 10.
Oh, look, people get hurt by all sorts of things. I mean, see somebody down the street and you say he's fat. I mean, that's hurtful to that person. People with colour, they get it all the time. People that are disabled get it more often than colour.
Up to date if you're up late. Lately with Karen Hay every weeknight from 10 on RNZ National.
This is Trending Now, our feature highlighting the stories you've been sharing.